Second grade Earth Science. Here comes the sun. What happened to the sponges? Before we take our final measurements, let's look at our data from day 1. When we measured the mass of both sponges before we put the water on it, they were both 13 grams. Then when we added 50 milliliters of water and measured the sponges again, we saw that they went up to 64 grams. So they increased in mass when we added the water. Now let's see what the final mass is of the sponge that was in the container with no lid and the sponge that was in the container with a lid. Okay, scientists, our containers have been outside for 3 days, and we're gonna take them inside to measure the mass of the sponge that was in the container without a lid and the container with a lid. But before we do that, I wanted to show you something that I observed. If I look closely at this container, I can see that there are little droplets of water. Where do you think they came from? This container doesn't have any. Okay, scientist, I'm back indoors and I'm ready to find out the results of our investigation. As you can see, I have our 2 sponges, our balance, and my data table so that we can take our final measurements. Let's start by finding the mass of the sponge that was in the container without a lid. So I'm going to put the sponge into the bucket of the balance, and let's look at our data table. So when we started, this sponge had a mass of 64 grams. Let's see what it is today. So since we were at 64 grams, I'm gonna start with the 50 gram. That's less than 64. Let's see what happens. That's too much. Maybe I will go down to our 20 gram. All right, so that's not enough. That means I need to add a little bit more, but not as much as 50. So this is a 10 gram. Let's put that in. And now you can see this side is a little too heavy. So let's put the 10 gram back and go to our next size, which is our 5 gram mass. Okay, that helped a little bit. Let's try a 2 gram mass. All right, we're starting to get a little bit more balanced. And if I look carefully, we need just a little bit more. So I'm adding 1 more gram. And I'm gonna watch it rock back and forth, and I will zoom in so that you can see that it's right there in the middle. There we go. So now let's add up our mass. So we have 20 grams plus 5 grams, that's 25 grams, plus 2 grams, that takes us to 27 grams, plus 1 gram, which takes us to 28 grams. So on my data chart, on sponge number 2, because that was our sponge with no lid, I am going to write 25, 6, 7, 8, 28 grams. Awesome. Let's check the mass of the next sponge. Now let's find the mass of the sponge that was in the container with a lid. But before we do that, I wonder if you can see what I see in this container. Now we're looking at the container from the top, and do you notice these little droplets of water? They're not on the outside, they're in the inside. Do you have any idea where those drops came from? Okay, so now I'm ready to take off the container. And if you can see, look at that. Look at all those droplets of water that were in the container. Very interesting. And when I look inside the container, I can see that there's water, and it goes all the way around. If you can't see it very well, I'll move it around. This is all very interesting. I wonder what is going on. So now let's find the mass. I'm going to take the sponge and place it in the bucket of the balance. And again, I'm going to go ahead and start with my 50 gram mass. Oh boy, 50 grams is not enough to balance the sponge and the weight, so I'm gonna have to add even more. Let's try 20. Okay, 20 was too much. So I'm gonna go down to our next size, our 10-gram mass. Oh, that's a little bit too much, so we're gonna have to go down to 5, but we're getting close. There's our 5. 5's not enough. Let's try a 2. Okay, so we've got a little bit of movement, but if I look carefully, I can see that the side with the sponge is still a little bit lower. So I'm gonna let's go for another 2. We'll give it a try. If we're wrong, we can just take it out and try the 1 gram. But as it's slowing down, it's rocking. Zoom in for you guys and you can see that it is right there in the center. So I'm gonna zoom out so that we can count the mass. All right, so we've got a 50 gram, and then we've got a 5. So 5 plus 50 is 55, plus 2 is 57, plus 2 is 59 grams. So I'm gonna come over here to my data table and write 59G. G stands for grams. And let's take a look at this data. Let's take a look at the results of our investigation. When we began, we took the mass of 2 sponges that had no water in them. Both sponges had a mass of 13 grams. Then we added 50 milliliters of water to each spun and found a mass. Sponge 1 had a mass of 64 grams and sponge 2 had a mass of 64 grams as well. So we have 2 sponges with the exact same amount of water in them. We put 1 sponge in a container with a lid. We put the other sponge in a container without a lid. After 3 days, we found the final mass. Sponge 1 that was in the container with a lid had a mass of 59 grams. Sponge 2, which was in a container with no lid, had a mass of 28 grams. So I did a little math and I found out that the sponge in the container with a lid had a mass that is 31 grams more than the sponge in the container with a lid. Why do you think that is? Why does the sponge that was in the container with a lid have a greater mass than the sponge that was in the container without a lid?